blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles and a solution for someone's problem. Know that the Dr. Vibe Show is the home of Epic Conversations, and I'm the host of Epic Conversations, broadcasting live on October 3rd, and it's Black Lady Magic time. We are back with Dr. Chetachi and with Ms. Leah Miller. They are back, rocking the house as always. Last week we had part one of a conversation called Victim Blaming and Why Society Always, well, not always, that seems a lot of the time they allow it. We're going to continue on the conversation, but first we just want to check in with our ladies. How are each of you doing?
Fantastic.
Good, good. Leah?
Good. Living my best life. No complaints.
Oh, how's language learning going?
It's still exhausting, but I feel like it's going to be an uphill battle for a while, and then hopefully I'll be able to coast for a while. Good. But I'm kind of in the hardest phases now.
Okay. And what language are you learning?
I'm learning Armenian.
Oh, Lord. You're strong,
yeah.
Man. You're strong. You're strong. You're strong. You're strong. All right, let's get to the conversation.
I'm trying.
Yeah, exactly. We did part one last week, ladies, and obviously there's been a number of things going on in the news in regards to this topic. Yeah. What I want to know is, do you think there's a different perspective, victim blaming wise, black women versus white women? And the reason why I bring this up is, of course, with what's going on with Mr. Kavanaugh in the United States, it perplexes me where I see white women supporting Mr. Kavanaugh, and I'm going, what's going on? What, if anything, do you hear about this subject from women of color? Whether it's Mr. Kavanaugh or just the whole issue of victim blaming?
I would say for me, I mean, go ahead, Tati.
No. I was asking if you wanted to go first. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, sure. All I was going to say is in that respect, in the conversations that I've been having with my colleagues, and it's usually a mixed bag in terms of both white females and females of color, and specifically African-American females, there's an overwhelming sense that that they support the plaintiff in this case. They're not in support of moving forward with the confirmation of Kavanaugh. They feel like that they're united sort of in their feelings that, you know, she has a credible story. She's a viable witness. She had very factual, real things to say. And if you look at the two testimonies, she came across far more compelling than he did. And I think just like the person who nominated him, he really showed us who he is. So in that, you know, in his testimony. And so I think a lot of people are frankly shocked and surprised. And all the women that I've spoken to, and they kind of do run the gamut from being more liberal to conservative, are not behind him. They're not behind him.
Okay. Tachi?
Yes. I was waiting for you to call my name.
No
anyway, so I haven't had a large amount of conversations about this, just simply because it gets to be overwhelming. You know, doing a program that deals with media tech and pop culture news, I can't not deal with this. I try not to deal with politics, as I call it, in a overwhelming, to an overwhelming extent, because it just gets to be very tiring. And with all of the stories that we've had lately dealing with sexual assault, sexual abuse, sexual harassment, from, I mean, this has always been, but really started with the Weinstein case. It's now every week somebody new comes out with, it's overwhelming, and it gets to be a lot. So I haven't had a lot of conversation about this. However, I will say, from looking at social media, from looking at the comments that the people I know have put on social media, both the people I know and don't know, like Leah, they tend to not support, overwhelmingly not support him, and they run the gamut in terms of where they are politically, and they tend not to be in support. There are those, however, that you see, I've seen comments on social media, which is why sometimes, like, you know, after the end of articles and things, I try not to read the comments because they're often uninformed and frankly stupid. So I try not to read them, but I have seen some that are, in support, like, oh, well, she's lying, or what about this, or what about that? Grasping at straws, basically. And but the whole thing is, I think that most sensible, reasonable people understand the extreme duress that you put yourself under when you come out saying these things against powerful individuals, whether they're powerful men or powerful women, whatever the case may be, and that you put yourself under extreme duress when you do this. So why would someone do this when there's nothing to be gained? It's not like she's asking for a payout. There's really nothing to be gained in this case except to, tell her truth. So in terms of what I've seen on social media, the people I know and don't know, most people are not in support of confirming his appointment.
Okay. Leah, you brought up this topic for conversation. I think it's obviously a very applicable time. The second part of this is why society allows it. Why do you feel society allows it?
I think we got into it a little bit last week, and I definitely hope we get to further into it tonight. I think that society allows it because it just goes along with status quo. People, at least what I've observed, is that people tend to rather ask for forgiveness than to seek permission. So I think there's a lot of entitlement. There is a lot of I think we've seen a rise sort of in bullying culture writ large, and I don't mean bullying like in the school sense, but just the loudmouth, the biggest person in the room who makes the most noise, gets the most attention, gets what they want. And most people just want things to kind of go along smoothly, and they don't want to rock the boat. And so I think when someone comes along who's brave enough to speak their truth to power and put themselves out there to be criticized in a public forum, they should be embraced. But instead what they're doing is they're causing a ripple effect, and they're provoking in people feelings of, well, that did happen to me, but I never said anything, or I know someone who did that, and it makes people uncomfortable. And people don't want to deal with that discomfort because it means they would actually have to do something to make any kind of substantive change to the mentality that the victimizers have, which unfortunately seems to be the mentality of the majority and the dominant class in the United States right now. So to me, I think, so what ends up happening is instead of actually facing doing anything legitimate or making any real change, instead society allows things to happen. They try to make it permissive, or they try to diminish whatever the crime was or the alleged abuse was, so that they don't have to take any action or hold a mirror up to themselves and actually confront the fact that they are guilty of these things, they do these things, and that abuse, especially of female, obviously there's abuse against males as well, is a rampant, widespread problem, not only in the United States, but globally. I think that for me, it's good to see these cases coming to light more and more and more, but it doesn't hold a candle to the cases that I know personally of people in my own lives. I would say probably the majority of my female friends have experienced at some point in their lifetime some form of sexual harassment or abuse from a male. And I think we're in a culture where that behavior has been tolerated, even encouraged by some people. And so because of that, no one wants to change or admit that they themselves could possibly be an abuser.
Mm-hmm. Tachi, what would you like to add?
I'm 100% on board with Leah. If you accept that these things are happening in society, then you bloody well have to get off of your behind and do something about it. And people don't like change, and people, even more than they don't like change, they don't want to do anything to make things change. And there are an awful lot of people who are vested in the system the way it is currently. So it's not to their advantage to ruffle or make things change. Even for somebody well-meaning. Somebody that is well-meaning, when you don't say something and you see something, you are benefit, for example, for a male, you're benefiting from this very system that is put in place to make sure that males hold onto their place in society. So by not saying anything, you're complicit, obviously, the abuse, but you also are benefiting, so you have something to lose. So even if on the surface, that's not the thing, they feel like they have something to lose. Deep down, if I say something, then I could lose my job. I could do this. I could do this. I'm breaking code. All those types of things, because we built this society on a foundation of ridiculous spirals of silence. And so, I mean, that's basically what I wanted to add. But Leah covered it all.
I love that quote. We built society on ridiculous spirals of silence. That is
I love that too.
That is a tweetable. Dr. Tachi,
It
drop the mic. Drop the mic already. Do you find it interesting that the first prominent person to be sent to jail in the victim blaming era is a man of color, Bill Cosby?
Ooh, can I take this, Leah?
Go ahead. Go ahead. I see you building up, so say it.
So I had this conversation last week on Mediascope with the audience when we were talking about the whole Bill Cosby verdict. Much as I did not want to spend a lot of time on it, we spent probably the whole first 45 minutes of the show on it. And I think that it still remains to be seen. We're very quick as people of color to jump to the conclusion of, if he had not been X, then the outcome may have been different. Now, I'm not saying that it wouldn't, because we still have a very real problem in terms of crime and equality of crime and punishment in this country. I get it. But when we put it in those terms, it erases the salience of what the issue actually is, which is this man has perpetrated crimes of sexual abuse and sexual harassment against countless women, as was found guilty by the jury, and they made their ruling. And so to say, well, they're only doing it because he's black, so hey, are we now ignoring the fact that he did something? The point of him being black and punished differently or unequally is separate from what he did. And what I think we need to do at this time is look at what he did, look at the hurt that he inflicted upon these women, and then once we start to see these verdicts come down from the other people, Weinstein, etc., then we need to say, all right, well, this was not equivalent in terms of punishment. Then we can look at that. But I think it's too early to do that. And again, it belittles the issue if we do that.
Exactly.
Leah, do you want to add to that?
I mean, no, there's not much to say. I mean, Tati always, it's as though she's in my head and she just says it in her words, but she's, we're on the same page pretty much on everything, but especially on this issue. As far as I'm concerned, it still hurts my heart to see what happened to him, but not because of everything that he did to countless victims. So the fact that he's a man of color and they were quicker to convict, so to speak, than maybe in other cases that are still ongoing, I think that the allegations against him have been going on for a very long time. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's just a culmination of something that had been going on for years and really had only received attention more publicly and more broadly in recent years as the momentum around victims' rights and these types of abuses by people in power, especially media figures and, Hollywood stars, are becoming those that are, the abusers, came to the fold. But again, the main thing that I feel is that he did the crime. He's got to do the time, regardless of his race. And I agree with Dr. Tachi that it is a bit early to kind of do the race thing. I'm not saying that it may not end up being true, but we need to wait to see what happens in the many, many, many other cases of other people that have had charges, waged against them, and then sort of look at it then when we have more comparators. Right now, we really don't have that many convictions.
And an interesting thing, if I could add to this, is that, when you were talking about Kavanaugh and how there were some women, I don't remember if you said white women or women in general, that were kind of defending him or believed him or did not believe the victim. It's interesting when it comes to women of color. Let's talk about black people. We are loyal to a fault, and it doesn't matter what this person did. We are like, well, we're going to march anyway, and we're going to do this anyway to a fault, especially black women. We have a tendency to do so. It's interesting that you bring that up, because in this case, I remember talking to people and hearing, and it's like, oh, well, black women saying, oh, well, they're just trying to. I'm like, so 40 people came out and they're all wrong. They're all lying. So are you only looking at this in terms of color? Because that conversely is problematic as well, which means that you don't have or you don't employ critical thinking skills when it comes to looking at men of color or people of color and things that they may have done because they are of color. You can't think critically through that. And that's a problem. We need to be able to separate and say, all right, okay, like this is basically, it's like, okay, we understand that there are differences, as I said, in crime and punishment. And I understand that at the end of the day, we do want to support Black people and help to uplift. But can we not unite for the wrong cause? To me, this is the wrong cause.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like for people who are more worried about the fact that he was convicted or perceived to have been convicted more quickly, or the fact that they're putting an 81-year-old behind bars, are missing the bigger picture and are missing really the whole point of the case, which is that he is a convicted abuser, a sex offender. He's hurt numerous people over many, many decades. So he is now paying for those crimes. His age, his race, in my opinion, have literally nothing to do with the fact that he was convicted.
All right.
And I'm not really bothered by it.
Okay.
I'm only bothered by the fact that it goes against my perception of Cosby, but from the Cosby Show. I don't know the real man, but the real man deserves to be behind bars.
Absolutely. The real man is not Dr. Heathcliff Huxtable.
Huxtable, exactly.
The real man is not Bill Cosby and the Cosby kids with the Fat Albert.
Right, or the Pudding Pops.
Or the Pudding Pops. So we have characterized him as a character, basically, someone that can do no wrong. So we tend, here's what we have, and let's take it to communication for a moment. We have, many of us, especially Black people, have a parasocial relationship with not only Bill Cosby, but the whole cast of the Cosby Show. We see them as our friends in our heads. We see them as, that could be my father. We see them as, hey, I'm from that type of family. Hey, I went to a Hillman type thing. So we see them as that instead of individual. This is for the same reason, this is a little on a tangent, but the same reason that the actor that played Elvin, Jeffrey, I can't remember his last name, was found to be working at Trader Joe's in New Jersey. The man is still an actor. The man still acts and teaches, but guess what? You're only as good as your last gig. So in between, do other things. He worked at Trader Joe's. Somebody publicly shamed him and people came to his defense, but this is the thing. We have this thing, oh, well, he was Elvin from the Cosby Show. How can he be broke? That's impossible. So we tend to have these parasocial relationships that are not real with these characters, and we have to realize they're real people.
Exactly.
Wonderful. Anything on that one, Leah? Want to move forward?
No, we can move on. I mean, Tachi closed that. She closed that chapter.
Good. What, if anything, past or present, are you hearing from men of color about victim blaming? Are you hearing anything? Have you had any conversations with any men of color about this?
I have not. I mean, it doesn't mean that men of color are not having conversations about it, but I haven't personally had any conversations with any male of color outside of my own family, meaning my husband. We've talked about it, but beyond that, I'm not hearing that conversation happening. I'm sure that it is, but I'm not a part of it.
Dr. Tachi?
You know, I haven't had conversations with men of color about this. I will say, though, and I haven't even seen, because I've been trying not to pay too much attention to comments on social media about this, but, you know, what I have seen is that some men of color feel that they're looking at it totally in terms of the crime and punishment thing, as opposed to from the victim's end. So in a sense, that's a way of indirect victim blaming. I've seen similar things in regards to, okay, when you talk about things like relationship, male-female relationships, and breaking up, and child support, and things like that, there tends to be a lot of, yeah, but sometimes, and this is what I can't stand, and I don't deal with men who call women females. A female what? But I tend to see a lot of, they're like, well, female sometimes. I'm like, A, female what? B, women sometimes do what, and what is your role in that? There's always some antecedent that causes an equal and opposite reaction. So what is your role in that? And often what happens is sometimes there's this turning around of the issue to make them victimized. And the whole thing is, because in our community, we've been taught that you're supposed to support the men and support black men. And, it's very easy to turn, something happens to you. It's very easy for that to flip and then they become the victim. And I'm not saying all black men, not at all. But this is what I've seen to some extent on social media from some black men. Most of the black men that I've seen have some semblance of sense when they're making, and they can see where there's an issue. And then there are even the ones that make a thing about the crime and punishment. They still, feel kind of how we do that. It's a little bit early to do this, but feel that could be a factor, and it's okay to feel that. And we're not saying that it's not. I would say probably this is the fact that there were a lot of non-melanated women that were amongst his victims, and this is a melanated man. Be for damn sure there was something there with it, I'm sure. But, what I'm seeing amongst men is that, it's too early to call, but then there are some of those, as we say, ignorant ones that have everything to say about it.
Absolutely.
Before we go any further, and I'll let Leah add on to that, I'd like to say hello to full-time supporter Ms. Divine Wright.
Yay!
Yes.
Yay!
And she said Mediascope was off the chain last Wednesday.
Oh, thank you.
And she says, hey there, sorors. There she's going.
Hey, soror.
And would like to say, as always, Black Lady Magic has got the necklace, the accessories, and the earrings going in full flight.
No.
They are.
Yes.
Come on.
Okay. Now, Divine Right is saying exactly, he's not Cliff. And she says,
exactly, he's not Cliff, yeah.
And she says, the only thing I saw on social media from men of color was from a fraternity that put the address to where people can write Bill Cosby. Not sure what that was about. Wow.
Okay.
So yeah, which is really interesting. Does it concern you, both of you, Black Lady Magic ladies, that you're not hearing anything from men of color about victim blaming?
I mean, it is concerning if there's an absence of male voices in an issue that so clearly isn't only about females. And especially given the fact that a lot of the female victims are largely women of color. And from a report that I read preparing for tonight, it shows that women in general, even though I will acknowledge men are abused too, but I'm putting that aside to speak about victimization of women specifically. In the report, it talked about the fact that most women never come forward, but to an even lesser extent do women of color. And just like in any case, most things happen intraracially. So that means that Black women are more likely to be abused by a Black man than by a man of another race. Conversely, white women will be likely abused by a white man because it's an intraracial connection. So the fact that we know this, and we know that Black women are victimized all the time, where are our brothers, where are our fathers, where are our uncles, where are our sons standing up for us, being our allies? Again, I'm not saying that they're not having these conversations. I'm just saying I haven't heard them or seen them. And so it is a bit disheartening and it is a little bit frightening. But again, to me, that kind of goes back to the larger societal issue that we started talking about, which is sort of the umbrella of the whole conversation, is that it goes back to, if you didn't see anything, and Dr. Chachi said this, if you don't see it, you're not going to say anything about it. And if you do see it, you're not going to do anything because it would require you to change or face something that's hard. So I believe that that applies to any male, regardless of their racial background.
Want to add to that, Dr. Tachi?
Yeah, I'm 100% with Leah. And I just have to say, Leah, you have the largest vocabulary of anyone I know. I'm like,
Tachi.
I step up my game.
Thank you. I feel like that way when I'm with you too.
No, but I'm like, I'm on
Professor.
I'm going to be on the air with Encyclopedia Brown tonight. I need
Yes. You know, I'm trying to keep this highbrow. You know, it's so easy for me to go down because that's where I really want to be, in the gutter, but I can't. So I bring, you know, encyclopedia to the mix.
Oh, wow, that's funny. Encyclopedia Brown.
I used to like that series. It was pretty good.
I loved it. So
Me too. I did too. Me too. I take it as a compliment. Thank you.
Yes, it is. It is. So, you know, just to add on, I think that for so long, sometimes, you know, it feels like I don't think we know how to express such emotions, because the only emotion that we've ever been allowed to exude is strength. We're not afforded, like, you know how they always say white people's tears? We don't have that luxury. We really don't. There's so much going on that if we broke down at every little thing, we would be a hot mess. And I think that was that the hardened exterior that you see on many of us. That's a legacy of being enslaved in this country. That's a legacy of colonialism and all sorts of other things that lead to now. So when you talk about emotion and expressing and doing these types of, I don't think we really know how often, especially men, because men are the ones that are told to be the least emotive. I think they don't know how to do that. So rather than putting it off, yeah, they're not doing it. And I'm really not one to make excuses for people. I'm like, oh, the hell, well, at some point you have to get tired enough of your condition to change it. But I do understand that I don't think sometimes we as people, as Black people, and then more specifically Black men, understand or know how to deal with that. And I think those are conversations that we need to start having in terms of how to be an ally and not just, you know, the silent ally, I love you because I put food on the table. You know, you've actually got to show and do, you know.
Yeah, and I would only add in addition to that too, that I think that white folks have been allowed to fully express themselves and they've had the freedom and luxury to do that. And people of color, specifically African Americans, we've been told to swallow our emotions. Just take it because you can, because you're strong. So I agree with Dr. Tachi.
Divine right here, I won't mention the fraternity, but some chimed on and said they had nothing to say. They were disgusted. Some wanted to reach out. It was a mix of emotions. And then she puts, need a Webster's dictionary to chat with you all. I love that Encyclopedia Brown. I'm glad I'm sitting on a chair, because if I'm standing up, I would have just dropped. So I'm glad. And speaking about, you were talking, Tachi, about the men and the emotions piece. If any man or lady wants to read a good book about men and emotions, I highly recommend this book by T.D. Jakes called He Motions. It is a fabulous, even though it's, I'll tell you how old it is. It was published back in 2004. It is still applicable today.
Wow.
Because the subtitle says, Even Strong Men Struggle.
Yep.
That is a very, that book has been one of those pillar books on my Mount Rushmore of books. That's one of the books that I have on there. So if we are not dealing with this victim blaming, what effect is it having on our young people?
Yeah, well, I'll take this one, or at least start it. As a mom, I think what I would assume is that if we're not dealing with it, then we're bound to repeat it, because we're not doing anything to change the course of the status quo. So if we're at a stage in our, society where we are bringing more light to this and raising awareness about it, and where there are people who are actually being convicted and prosecuted successfully for the crimes that they've committed, I think that's positive. But without having these conversations between male and female about these types of abuses, knowing your rights, knowing your advocacy, knowing what behavior is not okay, what's not tolerated, knowing that it's okay to say no, and saying no, we're basically dooming another generation to going through the same scenario over and over again. The only way that it's going to be changed is if we change it. And if we're not going to do the work, we're going to get the same result.
Tachi?
Well, what I'm lamenting is that the conversation always centers around what the victim needs to do to make themselves less victimized, as opposed to what the people who are perpetrating crimes, or the abusers, whatever the case may be, what they need to do in order to change, in order to make sure that it's almost as if you don't have to be a responsible citizen. And we're saying there's no need for you to be a responsible citizen, because what we're doing is we're teaching for example, if they're women, these women to XYZ, or these women need to XYZ. And the burden of proof does not lie on them. It is not contingent upon women to change when you're just sitting it's like sitting in the living room and then you get hit by a car. And then they say, well, what were you doing sitting in the living room? That's exactly what this is like. So, I kind of lament that. It's the same thing. We had another tangent, but still related. We had when I worked at my old university, we had a Black History Month program that was looking at police brutality and these types of things. And we had a police chief who happened to be a Black police chief. But of course, Blue will defend Blue, and he was trying to, but I could see Blue was defending Blue. And so my question to him is, why is it contingent upon the people who are victimized to change and not the police? So I'll say the same thing. I'll say the same thing. Why is it contingent upon the women or men who are being victimized to change and not the perpetrator? We are not setting up an atmosphere of change by saying that the change has to come from the person who's victimized. They're already beaten down. So we need to really start to, and this was interesting, really quickly. I was watching, there is a news reporter who happens to be half Nigerian. Her last name is Obalor, Demetria Obalor. So she is a weather person and also a newscaster in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And they had a conversation on one of their morning programs in Dallas about, should men have a curfew? And so they were talking about this, and I think I didn't get all the specifics because, of course, it was on Instagram. But I said, let me just look at the comments for a minute. Why did I do that? Who told me to do that? So I looked at the comments, and again, there was a lot of victim blaming. There was a lot, and then not only was there victim blaming, there was and I looked through most of the comments. There was little in terms of countering what was being put out there that was wrong. There was little in terms of that. And it could be that people are tired of educating people who are not worth the breath. But it also shows that, again, it's allowed to happen. We've allowed them to have this space and these thoughts, and nobody said anything. That's a microcosm of society. Even though we say that's social media, no, it's a microcosm of society.
Exactly. And that goes exactly to the whole point of why I wanted to talk about this, is that as a society, that is what we do. We say we want to talk about change and be about change, but yet we continue to blame the victim and talk about the victim's behaviors and what they can do to make themselves less of a victim or less vulnerable. We almost never talk about things that we can do to teach our young men about how to understand when someone's saying no, when they're telling you, or when they're giving you very clear signs that they don't want the attention that you're giving them, or teaching them common sense that if this person next to you is passed out, that doesn't give you permission to do what you want to them, because they're incapable of telling you whether or not they want your attention. So until we shift away from how the victim can make him or herself less of a victim, we're going to continue to follow the same loop. And society will continue to blame the victim, and it will not change.
We joined also on live audio-wise by Melvin Lars, and he makes a very interesting statement.
Melvin. Hey, Mel.
Yeah, he's saying that Americans have perfected victim blaming. Do you agree?
I think we're definitely good at it.
We're good at it.
Okay. At first
I'll say that.
Well, okay, so Tachi, at first you were agreeing, and then you backed off a little bit. What was the back off?
No. I was nodding because I said that's an interesting perspective, definitely. And it does feel like we're very good at it. But I think that we are not alone. When you look at abuse of women around the world, you could just look at okay, well, she was walking. Well, why wasn't she walking without a male companion? Or why wasn't she doing that? So there's a lot of victim blaming that goes on around the world. And I think that's just, we like to blame the victim because it's easier than doing the work.
Or taking responsibility for your actions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is it easier today more than any other time to shuck off responsibility when it comes to this subject? Are we moving backwards instead of forward in regards to dealing with this issue?
Let me say, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you go. Go ahead.
Okay. I think, again, this is one of the things where it's too early to say. I think we're at a standstill because we had been in this atmosphere of abuse for so long, and silent abuse at that, where, well, people knew what was going on, but nobody said anything because so much was at stake. Then Weinstein happened, bam. And so we see this a lot in the entertainment industry. I mean, I feel really sorry for those people that still work in restaurant industry, etc., where, things like this happen and we don't see it because it's not high profile. So, I think, I don't think we're moving backwards. I think there is now a spotlight that is shining on all of this. And so there's more, people are more cautious. But it remains to be seen as to whether things like the Time's Up organization and this whole #MeToo movement really have an effect of taking it forward. Because I think we're at a standstill now. Because it's like when you that moment in the room when if there are roaches in the room, they don't run immediately. It's like,
yeah, they freeze.
They freeze.
Like, you can't see me if I don't move.
Exactly. So they're like, the light has been turned on, the roaches are like, huh? So that's where the state that we're in right now, that kind of like freeze. We don't know until we start to see real change, real legislation, more, and not even just more women, but more people that have diverse thoughts, that are willing to make changes at the very top. So we won't know until we start to see that. And it's not going to be tomorrow. It's going to take a while.
Yeah.
Leah?
I would just add that I agree with everything that Tachi said. And to just put a positive spin on things, though, I do think that at least at a minimum at this stage of our society's evolution, we do have a much better opportunity to do right by the victims and to do more for them. Whereas in the past, there would never have been this type of attention paid to victims because it would have been considered normal. It would have been something that you don't talk about. Women were definitely second-class citizens. Even if you were being abused every day by your husband, you could not say anything about it. To save face, societally, it was never discussed. So I feel like there was just no avenue, no mechanism for victims to speak up, even if they wanted to in the past. Whereas at least now, some of those supports and institutions are in place so that if a victim does feel like they have the courage and the strength and it's the right time for them to come forward with their abuse, there are institutions and individuals that can help them. Whereas, I'm thinking about enslaved women. How many babies were born through rape? But nobody cared because they were all chattel. Even after slavery and moving into, more recent times when women couldn't work, you couldn't own land, you couldn't do anything. So if you're being abused, that's nothing compared to all the other rights that were being stripped and taken away from you or denied to you. But fast forward to the present, because of those women who suffered in silence, we're at an era where they no longer have to. But because of the societal mentality that we have, they're afraid to still come forward even if they can. And that's the part that I need to figure out as a society, how can we overcome that?
Absolutely. If I could give an example,
Yep.
I had, when I was at my other university, I had a student, and this was a small class. So we did an exercise called the box, which is like your Johari window, the 4 panes of the self. So I actually had them make a physical Johari window, and I made the outside like the things that were obvious, things that people knew about them, and the inside could be like the hidden self. I said, but don't feel like you have to share things that are never worked. They always came in sharing these deep, heavy stories. Everybody left crying. I said, this is the last time I'm doing this exercise. But I had one student when we were doing the box, and she actually was talking about, her boyfriend. And she was saying, he was abusive, like verbally. I don't know about physically, but definitely verbally. And she was saying, he calls me like, where are you? I don't know where you are. And she was like, so I was trying to be careful. I was like, well, how does that make you feel? And she was like, well, I said, that makes me feel good. It makes me feel like he loves me and cares about me. I was blown. But so I had to say, I said, I won't say anything now, but if you ever feel like you need to talk, please call me. So I left it at that because I didn't want to make it seem like that sometimes that just drives them further into the
relationship. Yeah,
exactly. But when you have, and she was like, how old was she at the time? Like 20. So they're young women, college age women, and high school age that are feeling that type of thing is love and being paid attention to, especially if they may not have had it. So I just wanted to bring that up because I find that interesting that it starts young. It starts really early.
Young.
They're being trained to think that this is okay, or they're seeing this in their families and they think that this is the norm and this is okay. That's why it continues.
Yep.
As we wind down here, when I look at what's going on with this subject and also the Me Too movement, I get a sense at times that for it to be really effective, women of color and women that are not of color need to unite. I don't see it because I don't see it as much as I'd like to. A lot of times I hear women of color saying, we're not being paid attention when it comes to victim blaming. The spotlight is being put on women who are not of color. What can be done, if it needs to be done, to bring women of color and not of color together to really make it this as powerful as it can be? Because the powers that be, let's get it straight, they're all of one color. What can be done to unite women really, because it's not where it should be yet. What can be done to bring it to be a all-encompassing movement? You take the example of Tiana Burke. Tiana Burke was a person who started the Me Too movement, but she doesn't get a lot of credit for it. What can be done?
It's true.
What can be done?
I mean, I'll only say that, because I think we've talked about this in prior conversations about how I think a lot of white feminists specifically feel like when they're championing their causes, it's inclusive of all women. And because they think that, sometimes they fail to recognize the fact that their approach is still coming from a position of privilege, and it will leave out many people, specifically women of color, whose experiences will diverge from theirs because of the racial component. And I know that probably in this Me Too movement as well, some of those dynamics are again at play. I do think that the end result will benefit all women if they get to where they're going in terms of getting people to get on board with what they're saying, pass the legislation that makes the type of change that we need to see societally. But I would also take your proposition a step further and say that I don't think it's just a matter of uniting white women and women of color. You need men. Men have to be a part of the conversation. It can't just be women defending other women, just like it can't always be people of color always speaking out for people of color. You need to have people in the power structure that you just laid out, which are not people of color, speaking on behalf of or in support of those other voices that aren't in the positions of making the powerful decisions or don't have the type of authority or influence that they hold. You need men to be just as much a part of the Me Too movement as females. And I think without that, it's not going to change, because as long as it's coming from a group that is relegated in society as a minority or second class, they're never going to have enough, push or impetus to make the kind of change they want without incorporating people that are currently sitting in positions of power. And the people who are currently sitting in the positions of power are not females of color and largely not white women, even though white women have more positions of power than women of color. But that's that's where I'm coming from. So I really think if the Me Too movement or any movement wants to really be successful, not only does it need to unite the women within the movement, it needs to incorporate men.
Tachi?
Well, Encyclopedia Brown said it all. I mean,
that's my new
name. It's going to be my new hashtag on my World Traveler page.
Yes.
/ Encyclopedia Brown.
Yes.
It should be. I mean, she really said it all, and that, I think that's the crux of it. That you have to have in any movement, you need the people involved, but you also need allies, and I think we definitely need male allies to say, no, enough. Society does not evolve or change if we allow this to continue. So absolutely. But so speaking to the women's end of it, and yeah, we've had this conversation in terms of feminism and white feminists and the lack of inclusive feeling that you may get. I think, real talk, I think that many black women also have to know that they can trust these white women. After all, there are 53% of white women voted for the person who currently lives at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. I don't say his name, but they currently voted for him. So I'm like, that puts you on board with this type of abuse, because predatory is as predatory does. So how do I know I can even trust you? I think this is what some people, so they have to show that they can be trusted. They have to show that they are about all women, regardless of whatever. And yeah, the burden of proof, unfortunately, is on them. And for the non-melanated women who are going there and putting in the work, it's a lot harder. It makes their job a lot harder, because you went and voted for somebody who's anti-woman, now I am affected by that. So it makes all of us look at them, hashtag side-eye, everybody. It's too bad. Even if that's not you, in this case, you get lumped together with those individuals. I think that there needs to be a real come to Jesus or come to whatever moment amongst all of them and talk to amongst themselves of, okay, how can we, before you talk to it, because this is interesting. There's always, whenever there is a lack, the first thing people do is to run to the community where the problem is, which makes sense. But I'm like, have you fixed what the problem is with you first?
Exactly.
I think that's exactly what they need to do. They need to start doing things, whether it's town halls, whether it's, conferences, etc., in terms of their role of in this, fixing that. And then you could talk about, you could show black women that, yeah, we are to be trusted. But I think, honestly, if we're being real, I think trust is a huge issue. And until we can get over that trust, we're going to have separate movements.
Wonderful. Yeah. Welcome to Curtis Brooks, who's jumped in, and then a little earlier.
Hello.
And Divine Right says, LOL at the roaches. Don't turn the lights on.
Yeah, I'm not saying I know that from experience, but
Look, if you live in the DC area, it doesn't matter
exactly.
where in a major city, there are roaches. It doesn't matter whether you live in
exactly.
There are roaches everywhere.
Exactly. I was going to say, Brooklyn or Manhattan, even pre-gentrification, you was dealing with roaches. So. Exactly.
Well, we're going to wind it down here because Black Lady Magic has to get the rest. And I know that one person is learning a new language and dealing with family. Another person did a show earlier on that was quite intense. We'll go with final comments. So we'll start off with Dr. Tachi. Any final comments when it comes to this situation of victim blaming and why society allows it?
I'm hopeful that we're moving in the direction that this is not permissible, that this is not allowed anymore, that we are now moving in a direction that we don't elect public officials who have these types of heinous thoughts. I'm hoping that the voices of right and the voices of reason and sensibility are loud enough to drown out the voice. And, it feels like there are millions of them. They're really not. It's just a minority that has a loud voice and happens to be in power right now. So I think that I'm hoping that we can. I hate to say I'm hopeful because I really don't have very much hope for us as a society, which is a terrible thing to say. But I mean, we haven't shown that anything that I can have hope, to be honest. But what I am hopeful for is that I'm starting to see small movement in terms of things, and big movements are usually started from small movements. Isn't that what you say, Dr. Vibe, that sometimes you have to get smaller to get stronger?
Yes.
So, yeah, I'm hoping that that's what we're doing.
Leah?
I'll just add that I agree with Tachi, and I hope that, as people are being held to the fire for, held responsible for their actions, that we continue to move in that direction. And we do need to call people into account for their behavior. And I don't care at what point in your life it happened. If you did it, then it's fair game, especially if you want to hold any type of position that puts other people's lives in your hands in terms of making a decision about things, about law, about other human beings. So I really want people to be on notice that you're not going to just get away with it because you are entitled or you think that you didn't do any wrong and everyone's against you and people are liars. It's not true. There's always a grain of truth in everything. So, there's one person's side, there's the other person's side, and there's the truth. But it doesn't mean that person's experience is invalid. And it doesn't mean just because you don't want to admit or take responsibility for what you did that it didn't happen. So I'm hoping that with the Me Too movement that it will continue to gain momentum. It will continue to get stronger. It will continue to incorporate more than just white women, which I think it already does have some of that, but I hope that continues, and that they don't stop putting pressure on legislators to make the types of institutional legislative changes that we need to see to actually shift our society from looking at the victim to looking at the abuser, and how can we stop the next generation of our youth to become the same as those that we're dealing with now.
Wonderful. Dr. Tachi, how can people touch base with you?
Well, I'm on several platforms. I'm on everything, basically. You can reach me on Twitter at Tachiata. Also, Periscope, I am at Tachiata. On Instagram, I am Dr_Tachi. And on Facebook, you can reach me on the Mediascope page, which brings me to Mediascope. I have a show called Mediascope. I talk all about media tech and pop culture every Wednesday evening, 5 p.m. Eastern time, or 5-ish. We start on Instagram Live. Then we move over at 6 p.m. Eastern time to Periscope and Facebook Live simultaneously. I also have a podcast with a good friend out in LA, Kevin Williams, and it's called TV Channeling. We talk all about TV, film, and entertainment news and do TV reviews, and that's at tvchanneling.com and every major podcasting platform.
Wonderful. Leah?
Okay, for me, you can find me at Leah World Traveler on everything. That's LIA World Traveler on my blog, on Facebook, on LinkedIn. I'm Leah Miller. On Twitter, I'm Leah World Travels. I have a bunch of stuff coming up soon. If you're in the DC metro area on Saturday, October 13th, go to my website and take a look at the information I have there about Learn, Shift, Grow. It's going to be a day for working moms to talk about work-life balance and making sure that you don't drop yourself off of the to-do list. And I'll be one of the featured speakers, and I'd love to engage with people, so I hope that you can come out for that. Then I have a bunch of new published things that are about to come out, ranging from travel and the RV, the summer experience that I just had, which was amazing, to talking about a hip-hop artist who's from the Dallas, Texas area, but has since moved to Puerto Rico and has been creating a movement with Afro-Latino music, really putting it on the map. That'll be coming out in a few days. And I'm currently working with the travel magazine, Griot's Republic, that I write for, on a piece related to Afro-Arab individuals to sort of talk about their background and their experience being both part of the Arab world, but also of African descent, and sort of how they've been treated in the world, how they move through the world. So I'll be sharing more on that soon. So please stay tuned.
Okay, so Leah, you're married, and how many kids you have?
I have 2, a boy and a girl.
Okay, and what are you doing during the daytime right now?
I'm learning another language.
What language?
Armenian.
Okay, I just wanted people to hear that, right? Because like I'm beginning to sweat just after what you just said. It's like I'm beginning to sweat. It's just like you're out of bounds.
It's too much.
But it's wonderful because I knew you when, and it's so wonderful to see what's going on now. And same thing with Dr. Tachi. I'm not leaving her out because she just finished producing or directing a pilot.
Yay! I'm so excited for her.
And it sounds like there's another one that you're going to be working on maybe in the near future.
Yeah, end of October. We're starting the pre-production for that.
So
that's amazing.
So I guess the next
amazing.
step is to get it launched, and the next step we'll see both you getting awards.
Hey, whatever may come, I'm here for it.
Exactly.
All right. Well, if you're not following these ladies via social media, your wood is wet. I'll just leave it at that. Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show. If you want to watch replays of my video conversations on YouTube, you're at the place. If you want to listen to replays of my audio conversations, it's the Dr. Vibe Show, THEDRVIBESHOW.com. There's Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, Google Music Play, and Stitcher. Selected audio replays are available at thegoodmanproject.com and WJMS Radio out of Chicago and Amazon Alexa. Certified Empowerment Coach, President and CEO of Express Your Vibe Coaching Communications. If you'd like a complimentary session, reach out to me, Twitter at DRVIBESHOW, email DR_VIBE at the DRVIBESHOW.com, or go to my website, go to the top, click on Contact the Dr. Vibe Show, and you can send me a message email-wise or audio-wise through my website. If you're a business or entrepreneur and you'd like to get media promotion, I run a service called Getting Media Coverage, where I help businesses and entrepreneurs get media promotion so they can elevate their business, product, or service. I like my food, too. I'm a foodie. That's why I'm a brand ambassador for the only online magazine dedicated to African Americans in food, wine, and culture. Name of the magazine